The city had taught Kong Min-jae how to breathe without revealing what he felt, how to stand still while storms passed through him unnoticed, and how to accept obligations that came wrapped in silk but tightened like wire. At 31, he had learned that power did not arrive with applause but with silence, and that silence now filled the black sedan carrying him through the night. The marriage had been decided without his consent long before the ink dried on the contracts that mattered more than emotions ever could. An alliance, his uncle had called it, a stabilizing gesture to calm investors and rivals alike, a union designed to soften a reputation sharpened by bloodless precision and quiet fear. Min-jae listened, nodded, and said nothing, because silence had kept him alive longer than protest ever would. He had been told the bride would be suitable, respectful, and grateful, words that felt like walls closing inward rather than promises opening outward. When he imagined her, his mind offered only a blurred silhouette beneath a veil, a stranger chosen to stand beside him while knowing nothing of the man she would be bound to. He wondered what she had been promised, what version of him had been sold as security or salvation. As the car slowed near the ceremonial hall, his driver asked softly, "Are you ready, sir?" And Min-jae answered with the practiced calm of someone who had survived worse moments than this one. "As I will ever be," he said, though his chest felt tighter than usual. Inside the hall, everything shimmered with deliberate elegance, white fabric draped like surrender, gold accents catching light meant to distract from the tension beneath. Guests spoke in hushed admiration, eyes sliding toward him with curiosity sharpened by rumor. His mother stood nearby, composed and distant, her approval measured rather than warm, and his uncle smiled with the satisfaction of a man arranging pieces on a board he believed he controlled. When Min-jae reached the altar, he kept his gaze forward, refusing to search for meaning in the faceless future awaiting him. The officiant's voice flowed steadily, rehearsed and hollow, until the moment arrived that could no longer be delayed. The bride stepped forward, her presence announced by a subtle shift in the room's attention, and Min-jae felt an unfamiliar hesitation ripple through him. He told himself it was nothing, that anticipation was merely another form of impatience, but when the veil was lifted, the world did not simply change, it stopped. The woman before him was not the indistinct figure he had imagined, but someone impossibly real, her dark skin glowing beneath the lights, her eyes steady and unafraid as they met his. Amani Okoye did not look grateful or submissive, nor did she look afraid. She looked present, fully and undeniably present, and Min-jae felt his breath catch in a way discipline could not immediately correct. "Hello," she said softly, as if greeting a person rather than a position, and the sound of her voice threaded through him with unexpected warmth. He realized, in that suspended instant, that this was no longer a transaction unfolding as planned, and that whatever was beginning would not be as simple as obedience or resistance. Amani had learned early that survival often required stillness, that listening could be a form of strength when movement invited harm. At 25, she carried herself with a quiet confidence of someone who had crossed oceans not just in distance, but in expectation, leaving behind a life where her choices had been limited by circumstance rather than ambition. When the proposal had arrived, framed as opportunity and honor, she had recognized the truth behind its careful language. Her family's debts would vanish, her siblings would receive educations they could only dream of, and she would become the wife of a powerful man whose world promised protection at the cost of autonomy. She had agreed not because she was blind to the danger, but because she understood leverage when she saw it. Standing at the altar, she felt the weight of countless eyes assessing her worth, measuring how well she fit into a story they believed already written. Yet when Min-jae looked at her, there was something in his expression that unsettled her expectations. He did not leer or dismiss her with polite indifference, nor did he assert ownership through dominance disguised as courtesy. He looked startled, almost disarmed, as if he too had been unprepared for the reality of her presence. As the ceremony continued, their hands were guided together, his palm warm and steady despite the tension she sensed beneath his calm exterior. She leaned closer when required, whispering the responses she had practiced, and noticed how his shoulders relaxed slightly at her proximity, a subtle shift that did not escape her attention. "You seem surprised," she murmured during a pause meant for silence, testing the boundaries of this fragile arrangement. He hesitated before answering, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I was told many things, he admitted, but none of them prepared me for you. The honesty in his words, unpolished and unexpected, sparked something cautious within her. She smiled faintly, not as performance but as acknowledgement, and replied, I was told you would not look at me like a person. His gaze sharpened with interest, and for the first time since she had arrived in this country, Amani felt a flicker of possibility rather than resignation. When the officiant pronounced them bound, applause filled the hall, yet the sound felt distant, as though the real moment existed only in the quiet exchange between them. As they turned to face the guests, Min-jae leaned slightly toward her and said, Whatever they expect from us, we will decide how this truly looks. She met his eyes, searching for deception, and finding instead a guarded sincerity that mirrored her own. Then we should start by being honest, she replied, and he nodded, a small gesture that felt like the first step onto uncertain ground they would have to navigate together. The reception unfolded with all the expected grandeur, yet beneath the polished surface, Min-jae sensed a shift he could not ignore. Amani moved through the room with composed grace, greeting elders with respect while refusing to shrink herself into invisibility. She asked questions, listened attentively, and when she spoke, it was with a clarity that commanded attention without demanding it. He watched from a distance, noting how his associates reacted to her presence, some with surprise, others with thinly veiled calculation. When she finally joined him at the table reserved for appearances, he leaned closer and said quietly, You do not behave like someone afraid. She sipped her drink before answering, her voice calm and steady. Fear does not disappear because circumstances change, she said. It just learns when to speak. Her words lingered with him, echoing truths he had buried beneath years of obligation. Later, as tradition required them to retreat briefly from the crowd, they found themselves alone in a quiet room overlooking the city's lights. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile, filled with questions neither yet knew how to ask. Min-jae removed his jacket, setting it aside as if shedding a layer of armor, and said, I do not expect affection, only cooperation. Amani studied him, noting the fatigue beneath his composure, the restraint that seemed less like arrogance and more like survival. I do not give affection where there is no respect, she replied, but I will not pretend indifference if something grows. He considered her words, then allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. That seems fair, he said, and in that moment, the arrangement began to resemble a partnership rather than a prison. As they returned to the hall, side by side, Min-jae felt a protective impulse stir unexpectedly within him, not born of ownership, but of recognition. He realized that the alliance designed to control him might instead become the catalyst for something neither side had anticipated, and that the woman beside him was not a liability, but a force whose presence challenged the careful distance he had maintained from hope. In the days that followed, their shared life unfolded cautiously, each interaction layered with unspoken negotiation. The residence assigned to them was vast and impersonal, designed to impress rather than comfort, yet Amani moved through it with curiosity instead of intimidation. She asked about the art on the walls, the history of the space, and the routines Min-jae followed with almost ritual precision. He answered where he could, deflecting when questions brushed too close to dangerous truths, yet finding himself more open than he had expected. One evening, as they sat across from each other sharing a quiet meal, she asked, Do you ever regret the path you were placed on? And he paused, chopsticks suspended midair. Regret implies choice, he said finally. And I learned early that some paths are decided before you can walk. She nodded, understanding more than he had intended to reveal, and replied, I believe choice still exists, even when options are limited. Her conviction unsettled him, not because it was naive, but because it hinted at a freedom he had long dismissed as illusion. When threats emerged, subtle and coded, Min-jae's instincts sharpened, his attention narrowing around Amani's safety in ways that surprised even himself. He assigned additional security without explaining why, watched how rivals' gazes lingered on her, and positioned himself between her and potential danger with quiet insistence. One night, after an incident that left tension humming through the household, she confronted him gently but firmly. You do not need to shield me from everything, she said, meeting his eyes without flinching. He exhaled slowly, the weight of responsibility evident in his posture. Protection is not control, he replied, and I will not apologize for wanting you safe. The sincerity in his voice softened her resistance, and she stepped closer, lowering her tone. Then trust me to stand with you, not behind you, she said, and the closeness between them felt charged with something fragile and promising. In that moment, Min-jae realized that the line he had drawn between duty and desire was blurring, reshaped by a woman who refused to be reduced to an accessory in someone else's strategy. Public scrutiny intensified as their union drew attention, whispers circulating about the unexpected dynamic between them. At a formal gathering meant to test loyalty and appearances, Min-jae sensed the trap before it fully revealed itself, the questions edged with provocation, the smiles too sharp to be sincere. When an influential figure remarked loudly on Amani's origins, framing curiosity as condescension, Min-jae felt anger flare beneath his controlled exterior. Before he could respond, Amani spoke, her voice calm but unyielding. I come from a place where strength is measured by resilience, not by proximity to power, she said, her gaze unwavering. The room stilled, and Min-jae placed a hand at her back, a deliberate gesture of alignment that spoke louder than any words. My wife's strength is precisely why she stands beside me, he added, his tone final. The confrontation passed, but its impact lingered, reshaping perceptions and solidifying their unspoken bond. Later, alone once more, Amani turned to him and asked softly, "Why did you defend me so openly?" He did not hesitate. Because respect, once given, cannot be retracted without losing oneself, he said, and she reached for his hand, squeezing it gently in a way that felt both intimate and affirming. As the city lights shimmered beyond the windows, Min-jae understood that the marriage he had braced himself to endure was becoming something else entirely, a connection forged not by obligation alone but by mutual recognition and a growing, undeniable pull that neither of them could ignore. The space between them began to feel charged in ways Min-jae could no longer dismiss as coincidence or circumstance. It was there in the way his gaze lingered on Amani when she was unaware of it, in the quiet pull he felt whenever she entered a room, as though the world subtly realigned itself around her presence. He noticed how her laughter, rare and restrained, softened the sharp edges of his thoughts, how her silence felt companionable rather than distant. One evening, as dusk painted the city in muted gold, Amani stood near the balcony doors, her silhouette framed by fading light. "You look at this city as if it has taken more from you than it has given," she said gently. Min-jae joined her, standing close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder without touching. "It taught me how to survive," he replied, his voice low. "But it never taught me how to live," she turned then, her eyes searching his face with an intimacy that made his breath slow. "Perhaps," she said softly, "that lesson does not come from places, but from people." The words settled between them, and when her fingers brushed his hand, the contact felt deliberate, unhurried, filled with unspoken understanding. He did not pull away. Instead, he laced his fingers with hers, the simple act carrying more vulnerability than any confession he had ever made. In that quiet moment, Min-jae realized how deeply he wanted to protect not just her safety, but the fragile hope she awakened within him. Their connection deepened through moments that felt almost ordinary, yet carried extraordinary weight. Shared breakfasts stretched into long conversations, glances exchanged across crowded rooms conveyed reassurance without words, and late nights unfolded with them seated close, discussing dreams they had once believed impractical or dangerous. Amani spoke of her childhood with tenderness rather than bitterness, of resilience learned through necessity, of love shaped by sacrifice. Min-jae listened, captivated not by the details alone, but by the strength beneath her vulnerability. When he shared fragments of his own past, she did not recoil or romanticize his world, but met his truths with quiet acceptance. "You are not defined solely by the shadows you inhabit," she told him one night, her voice steady as her hand rested against his chest. "You are also defined by how you choose to step into the light." Her touch lingered, grounding him, and he covered her hand with his, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath their palms. "I did not expect to feel this," he admitted, the honesty raw. "Nor did I," she replied, her lips curving into a soft smile, "but I am not afraid of it." When he leaned closer, resting his forehead against hers. The intimacy felt natural, unforced, and when their lips met, the kiss was tender and unhurried, filled with a reverence that spoke of mutual choice rather than obligation. As the world outside continued to test them, their bond became a refuge neither had anticipated. After tense meetings and veiled threats, Min-jae found solace in the way Amani would seek him out, her presence calming the restless edge that followed him home. One night, after an especially fraught encounter, he stood alone in the dimly lit room, tension coiled tightly within him. Amani approached quietly, her arms wrapping around him from behind, her cheek resting against his back. "You do not have to carry everything alone," she whispered. He exhaled slowly, allowing himself to lean into her embrace, the release almost overwhelming. Turning to face her, he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing along her cheek, as if memorizing the curve. "I never thought someone could make this life feel less heavy," he said, his voice barely above a murmur. Her eyes softened, shining with emotion. "And I never thought I would find tenderness where I expected only distance," she replied. He kissed her then with a depth that surprised them both, the connection intense yet careful, as if they were discovering each other layer by layer. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. "Stay with me," he said, not as a command, but as a plea shaped by hope. "I am here," she answered simply, and the certainty in her voice anchored him more firmly than any oath ever could. Public perception shifted as their unity became undeniable, yet it was in private moments that their romance truly flourished. They learned each other's rhythms, the quiet comfort of shared silence, the reassurance found in small gestures that spoke volumes. Min-jae began to imagine a future not merely endured, but desired, one where love did not weaken his resolve, but sharpened it with purpose. Amani, sensing the transformation, encouraged him without pressure, reminding him that love could coexist with strength. "What we choose each other for matters," she said one evening, her hand entwined with his. Not what others intended. When he looked at her then, he saw not just the woman he had married, but the partner he had chosen, the one who had slipped past his defenses and settled into his heart with quiet inevitability. "I choose you," he said, the words unadorned but profound. Her smile was radiant, filled with warmth and certainty, and as she leaned into his embrace, the world beyond them faded into irrelevance. In that shared space, love was no longer a risk to be managed, but a truth to be honored, and Min-jae knew that whatever storms awaited them, they would face them bound not by obligation alone, but by a devotion that had grown unexpectedly, irresistibly real.